everyone, and welcome back to another video. My name is Jenna Van Mourik. I'm a writer and a reader of historical fiction and historical Christian fiction specifically. These are my books. The first one is called Jerusalem's Daughter and the second one is called Antioch's Daughter. I love them equally, but Antioch's Daughter is the newest one, so it's currently taking the spotlight from me right now. And this video is for all of those of you who are writers or are interested in writing, or you are just the kind of person that likes knowing the behind the scenes of the writing process. I know that I love when authors post things or talk publicly about what the writing process was like, because one, it gets me excited to read the book, and two, it gets me excited to read even more books by them, because I like to be feel like I'm kind of connected to the process and I like to get updates. So this video is going to be me giving you guys an update on my writing journey, where I'm at with writing, and also just talking about some writing things in general. And what I wanted to talk today about is specifically the idea that writing is a muscle, because it is. So let's get into it. I feel like we hear often the phrase that writing is a muscle, and that is definitely true, but it can be one of those phrases that you hear over and over again as a writer or as just a person that's interested in words that becomes a little bit overused, and therefore you don't really take it to heart. But I have learned recently, as I have been working on my third book, that it is so true. I wrote my first book while I was in the thick of my college education, and I wrote it kind of slowly over the course of summer, and then I finished it in NaNoWriMo, and the bulk of it was written in NaNoWriMo of 2018. So that was, in fact, many moons ago. Too many moons for me to count. My second book I started working on after my first book was published, and maybe this was not a good strategy, because I think they kind of tell you, you know, for the moment you publish your first book, or you put out any kind of art or creation, if you're a creative person, the moment you put something out, the next question that's going to be off of people's tongues is, but when is the next one? Which is a good thing, because it means people are excited, but it is definitely a very overwhelming thing, especially if you don't know when the next thing is coming. And for me, I did not know at all when my next book was coming out when I published Jerusalem's Daughter. I had kind of a vague timeline. That's not true. Let's get into this. When I published Jerusalem's Daughter, which was in 2021, so many years after I wrote that first draft. It took me years, because I also graduated college in that time. I worked with an editor for the first time. I did beta readers for the first time. I did, you know, I had to learn about cover design and publishing and KDP and all these things. So that was like a slow process that for me, as I chipped away slowly over the course of like many years, was sort of like a hobby. And then once it was out, I had graduated college and I was like, okay, this is career now. This is not hobby, this is career. And from that point, I kind of said, well, I wrote most of Jerusalem's Daughter over the course of a few months and in NaNoWriMo, so I'm sure if I just put my butt in the chair, then I could write Antioch's Daughter in the same amount of time and then, you know, publish it next year. And that did not end up happening even close. After publishing Jerusalem's Daughter, went through the most insane period of imposter syndrome that I knew to anticipate from talking to other authors who, you know, what it was like once they'd published their debut. Because publishing your debut is very different from publishing a sequel, and I want to do a whole separate video on that, in the good and the bad and the better, basically. But once I published my debut, it was like I was thinking all kinds of things that had never even crossed my mind. Even though I knew to expect a certain level of writing related anxiety, it was like nothing I could have foreseen for me personally. And that made it incredibly hard to work on book 2, even though I had the whole thing outlined. I didn't have a single word down when I published Jerusalem's Daughter. I just kind of knew a vague idea of what it was going to be. And in fact, I only actually had it outlined from the perspective of Cassius. So my books tend to be dual POV novels, which means that they're told from the perspective of two different characters, the main male character and the main female character, and there's typically romance involved, but the romance is not the main central theme in the story because it's historical fiction first and historical romance second. When I outlined this book, I only outlined the male character's POV because I just kind of figured I would like wing it, right? I could wing the rest of it as long as I knew basis of what I was doing, and that was such a bad decision. I would write and start over and write and start over and write and start over because I just couldn't get it right. I couldn't get the writing right. Now, looking back, would I change anything about this? No, because to me, this was all, in hindsight, an important and vital part of the process for me of getting to know all of my characters, not just the main one that I was like super inspired to write about, but all of them. I ended up writing the story out of order. I didn't write it consecutively. I wrote the scenes I was inspired to write and then went back through and kind of filled in the gaps and then went back through and filled in even more of the gaps. And it was such an unusual process for me. And then I got finished with my first draft and it was a mess, and then I went over it and over it and over it and over it again and again and again and again and again, and so many nights I was just in complete tears, like an emotional wreck, thinking like, I am never going to get this book out, because while I was writing it, I was battling a creative struggle of just having a lot of writer's block, and I would write big chunks at short spurts of time and then go like weeks without touching it again. I was trying to balance another job that was taking a lot of my creative energy. I worked in a job that was just required a lot of my creativity, so by the time I got home from work that day, I didn't have any creativity left to pour into the story. I also just had some personal, like spiritual and emotional battles that I was working through in terms of anxiety and just a lot of different things that just like made it really difficult to be able to work on this book. And eventually got to a point where I did get through a lot of those hard things, and I got through the imposter syndrome, and I got through the anxiety, and I got through so much stuff in that time. But every time I would think that the end was in sight and I would set a release date that I wouldn't announce publicly, I would set it in my mind, I would set that goal and then I would miss that goal. And it got to the point where for me, this was a necessary experience because it really taught me to trust in God. I have a sign on my wall of inspirational quotes behind me, and this is kind of like my writing den. I have a sign on this wall that says, I trust the next chapter because I know the author. And for me, that was something that really, over the course of writing this book, I had to just fall into that idea because there was no other option. I would set goals and I would try to do it on my own, and it did not happen. And I think that for me, that was important because as a person and as a human and as a Christian, I really learned to just trust God and just completely give up the process. For me, publishing Jerusalem's Daughter was definitely a God thing for me. That was something that I didn't set a goal in mind when I started writing it. I just wrote it for personal reasons and then was able to publish it several years later. When I approached writing Antioch's Daughter, I was approaching it as like, well, this is my career now. I need to write it and publish it and do all of these things within this set frame of mind. And I really just kind of got lost in that. And it wasn't until I completely gave that all up and just gave it over to God and said, you know what? I'm not gonna make a deadline, so I'm not gonna bother setting one, and I'm just gonna go into this very prayerfully and just keep moving into the next space that God opens and not try to push forward on my own, because it's not by my strength that I'm able to publish these books, it's by His strength. And I ended up publishing my second book in the summer of this year. Was it later than I thought it was gonna be? Yeah. But was it actually a good experience that strengthened me both as a writer and as a person of faith? Definitely also yes. I wouldn't change anything about this story, and I'm a firm believer as a self-published author and as a writer and as a creative, I'm a firm believer that everything I create, when I am creating it with the, idea of creating for the glory of God in mind, when I create it and when I put it out when it's supposed to be put out. And I just publish it or I send it out into the world, and I just pray to God, if that reaches just one person, that it reaches them at the time when they are ready to receive it. And that's ultimately my prayer and my goal with everything I put out, is that, you know, if it's just supposed to reach even one person, that it goes out and is published and is given to that one person and they find it at the right time. And so for me, it's publishing and writing is never really something that I have set, is not something that I, at this point in my life, set concrete goals for. It's something that I go into prayerfully and openly and just say, if someone asks me when the next one's coming out, I'm going to tell them it's coming out in God's time. And if someone asks me, you know, how they can help or how they can support, or, you know, for more details, I just tell them, hey, you know as much as I do about this, and the best way that you can support me in my writing is to just pray for me. And I think that's true of all of your favorite authors. You know, if you want to see them succeed and you are excited for new books, I would just say to pray for them, because writers and creatives and people in pretty much every field, not just writing, but since this is a bookish channel, I'm focusing in on writing. We all of us go through different battles and face different things, and the best way to encourage and support and help someone going through something is, I firmly believe, by praying for them. I'm a firm believer in prayer chains and prayer warriors and the power of prayer. So for me, the best way you could support me, if you are a reader and you are excited to see the next book, is just pray for me, pray for that book, pray for the story, pray for the words, pray, you know, not just for me, but for all of your authors that you admire, you know, pray that the words would come to them, that God would lead them in their storytelling and in their career. For me, going back to the theme of this video, which is that writing is a muscle, that's something I kind of touched on, whereas with Jerusalem's Daughter, I wrote it very quickly over the course of a few months and mostly in NaNoWriMo. Antioch's Daughter, because I was splitting so much of my creative energy between my writing and then my like real person job, or my like non-writing job that was still a creative job, but it wasn't for my books, I would struggle to work on it and gain traction, because I would work on it and I would do a lot in a really short amount of time, and then I would just like fall off the deep end, essentially. Something that kind of I had questions about when I went into my third book and the process of writing my third book was, is drafting going to be as hard as it was for book 2 or as easy as it was for book 1? I kind of had said, like, I am so not looking forward to drafting because I just knew it was going to be painful. And that turned out to not be true. I have been able to write so far, not a guarantee, but recently I have been able to write usually like 1 to 2, sometimes 3,000 words per day in this manuscript, and it has been relatively painless. That's not to say that it's been completely painless, but I have approached the book the way I've approached every other book that I've written, with outlining first and then drafting, and will eventually move on to editing. But I go in with a plan and I know what I'm doing, and then I draft. And were the first few days, weeks of drafting really painful? Yes. It was like nails on a chalkboard, like pulling teeth. The words were coming so slowly, and I kind of thought, this is awful, I'm never going to get this book done. Maybe that second book was the last book I'm ever going to publish. I don't even know if I want to announce this book yet. It's just, it's coming along so slowly. But as I kept at it and I kept being consistent with it, it got easier and easier and easier to draft the book and write those words. And that's how I've been able to get up to that consistent, you know, 1, 2 to 3,000 words per day ability, is just by doing it every single day, even when it's tough, because whether we want to hear it or not, writing is a muscle. And the best way to write a story and get better at writing is to be consistent in your writing and just push yourself. And I know not everybody, this doesn't necessarily work for everybody, to write when you don't feel like writing, but for me, I found that it is important to write when I don't feel like writing, because it keeps that muscle trained. It keeps that part of my brain active and working and ready to work. Similarly to if you were trying to run a marathon and you only practice a handful of times and then the marathon came, you would struggle because you wouldn't have those muscles muscles trained to do what they need to do. Writing is a muscle. Being creative is a muscle. Everything is a muscle, and it requires, you know, consistency and time and training to be able to do and do well. With Jerusalem's Daughter, the reason I was able to write it so fast was because I was writing it over the course of NaNoWriMo. And I realize I've said that without explaining it, but if you don't know what NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month. It happens every year in the month of November, but it's a concept that people have taken and adapted to mean pretty much anything they want it to mean. It's just basically trying to write 1,000 words every day, or, you know, however many words every day for an entire month, and then by the end of that month having like a novel. I think the exact number of words you write per day varies, obviously, depending on the length of the book you are trying to write, but that's like the general rule of thumb, is like 1,000 to 2,000 words a day every day for an entire month, and then at the end of the month you will have a novel. So that's how I was able to get Jerusalem's Daughter finished, and when I look back, that actually makes so much sense. It's definitely true, and there definitely is a method to the madness. With Antioch's Daughter, because I was taking long breaks, it was harder for me to stay in the story, and I just couldn't wait to get to the editing phase because editing came so much more naturally. But like, to that point, everything sounds better when it's not what you're currently doing. So when I'm outlining, I can't wait to draft. When I'm drafting, I can't wait to edit. And when I edit, I can't wait to be publishing. And when I'm publishing, I can't wait to be back to drafting. So how's that for logic for you? I feel like that's just kind of a lesson in life, is, you know, everything sounds better when you're not doing that thing. The grass is always greener on the other side. So these, I feel like, are messages and applications that we can apply to every part of life. And I think that's something that I just want to encourage y'all with today, that, you know, whatever you're doing, it is a muscle. And if you're struggling with consistency or building good habits, you know, it's all about taking your time and really just building that muscle in and pushing through hard things and doing things even when you don't want to. Not that like I've ever not wanted to write, but there are some days where it just feels hard, and it's like, well, I do want to do this because I know it will be good and I will enjoy the end result, but doing it right now isn't easy. And I think for me, that's why you should do it. It will continue to be hard and difficult if you never get started. But if you get started and you keep at it and you keep being consistent and you train those muscles, eventually things will get easier. So that's just something I wanted to encourage you guys with today, that writing is a muscle, but hopefully that is a lesson and an application that you can take into so many different areas of your life. My name is Jenna Van Mourik, once again, in case I didn't say it already. You can find more information about me and who I am and what I do and my books and all those kinds of things in this little card over here, and of course in the description box below. Thank you again so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to give it a like and a thumbs up and subscribe and do all of those things if you want to see more content like this. Let me know what you thought about today's video in the comment section, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!